In the summer of 2007, I was in Lucerne and I decided I wanted to go on holiday. I wanted to go somewhere. And I found this perfect trip. It was to Wiltshire, which has got the most brilliant ancient landscape. And it had all these amazing things that were going to happen. We were going to see Silbury Hill and Stonehenge and Avebury Stone Circle and all sorts of things. And at the end, it said, I was about to do the button and say, yes, I'm going to do that. At the end, it said that this trip includes tickets to the Crop Circle Conference in Marlborough. And I thought, forget the trip. I need to get my ass down to that conference and I need to go and see what's going on there, because that just sounds like the most amazing thing to do. So that's what I did, actually. And just so if you want to know what my crop surgical credentials are like, these are all the books that I own on the subject. Yes, it's a real area of interest for me. And there are even some books there that are duplicated because they're different revisions and things like that. So I'm completely geeked out on that. I also have a pile of magazines about crop circles, and these are not fanzine type magazines. These are real proper research material, and it's all people who are doing very serious things. It's a deadly serious subject, and you've got to know this, okay? So what I'm going to do now is, oh, and by the way, I've even got a sort of a painting of an inside of a crop circle in my house. That's how serious it is. Okay? So now what I want to do is I want to show you what crop circles are. So first of all, a crop circle is basically just a bent plant material, It's basically usually wheat that's bent over. It's not mown, it's not damaged, it's just literally bent over, and it makes patterns. And it could be wheat, it could be barley, it could be canola, all sorts of things, and that just basically extends the season. You have different textures and different effects, but basically a crop circle is literally just flattened plant material. Okay, so this is my favorite crop circle I'm going to show you, okay, just to give you an idea of what it looks like, and I'm going to tell you why it's my favorite crop circle. Okay, so this is huge, right? Now the reason is it's not the most beautiful or the most complex, but this is why I like it. Right, you can see that there are three sort of burial mounds on the photo, and that's also very much part of the landscape and part of why I love Wiltshire countryside. But can you just see that it just, butts up against this one, it just touches that one, it just touches that one, it just goes to the edges, and it's bloody perfect. It's just like put there. And this is big, and it was done at night, and that's what's really incredible about it. So this is one of my personal favorites. It really had to fit almost exactly. And this is exactly the time now to tell you how the crop circle culture works. Okay, so first of all, you've got three camps of people within the subculture, and they are all at each other's throats all of the time. So the first type, it's very adversarial, it's really political, okay? So the first bunch of people are what we call the believers. These are people who will look at a crop circle like this and say, there's no way somebody made that, because look at the precision, look at the size, look at the beauty. It's done at night, it can't be done. So they believe it's done by supernatural means, okay? Could be aliens, could be anything, special forces, but it's not people, not guys with planks, okay? So that's the first set. These are the ones that have the conferences and sell the postcards and make all the money. So that's who they are. The second camp are the guys with the planks and everything who make the crop circles. Okay, so they go out and they actually do this. And they're always at each other. The people who make the crop circles are not allowed to come to the events, and if they do, they're asked to leave. So when I go there, I have to keep my trap shut. That's actually fun. And the third bunch of people are the farmers themselves, who are historically so pissed off with all these people coming all over their land. So what they've got people coming with planks, trespassing onto their land, flattening their crop, which is basically their livelihood. Now the crop can still be harvested at this point, it's not like damaged forever, but then me and my mates from all over the place turn up there like it's a public place, and we now take our pictures, and that's when the damage occurs, when everyone pulls in there with their cars and whatever, and actually just messes everything up. So the farmers have got more than enough on their plates, and they just basically hate all of that. So that's basically how it's set up. Okay, these are the three camps. Now I will tell you straight away that I am not a believer. Okay, I'm really not a believer, and this will filter the conversation that I'm going to have with you today. So if you spoke to somebody else, they might tell you about the same series of events, but they might tell you a completely different story. So I want to let you know that this is the filter with which you're receiving this information. Now I'm going to show you another crop circle. This is one of the last ones that I saw, and it is absolutely amazing. This is huge. And there's just many hundreds of these huge circles, and it's just absolutely stunning. And this is taken from the sky, but when you're actually in it, you know, it has another effect. When you're in a crop circle, you can't always see what it is, but I mean, it really is incredible. It is an incredible thing. Okay, so basically, this is the what it's about. So I decided now that I was going to go to this crop circle conference that I told you about at the beginning. Now, I might have been the only person to attend a crop circle conference who had never seen a crop circle before I actually went, but I thought that's okay. So there's my little badge, okay, with my name on it, crop circle, study group, you know, there's nothing, just really important stuff. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go for the weekend, and I've got, you know, it all worked out. I'm going for all the days. But then I had a job interview just before that in the city, which was my previous existence, very serious job. And they liked me, and they looked like they were going to give me the job. And they said, actually, yeah, we would like you to start on Monday. And I thought, oh shit, like on Monday, I'm going on a field tour to see crop circles. So I actually said to them, I can't start on Monday because I'm going to crop circle conference. And while I would not recommend that you say that, they actually quite liked the idea. I realised later they were a bit unusual as well. So that worked, but it's not something you should really do. So I got my badge, and I'm now going to see a crop circle. So the first crop circle I saw was actually pathetic. It wasn't even a fancy one, nothing like the ones I showed you before. I was hoping for something spectacular, but no, that didn't happen. But this is what happened, right? So now here we are in the crop circle, and this lady from the back here is called Francine Blake, and she's a researcher, a really important, knowledgeable researcher. She's one of the people that are known in this area. I like her lots. She's a wonderful person, and she's really sweet, and she knows her stuff. But she's a believer, right? Now what she's doing there, okay, is she's got a stem, and she's explaining to us how to know if it's a genuine crop circle or not. So genuine means supernatural, and hoaxed is guys with planks. So they know that they are guys with planks, but they're hoaxes, and there are ways that you can tell. Right, so what she's doing is she's showing us the end of the stem, right? Because there's some really important things at the end of the stem that will explain to you. Now, the thing that I have to tell you about, okay, this is why this becomes really interesting, because even as a person who isn't a believer, I can tell you that weird shit happens in those fields. It really does. And this is where we're going to start talking about it. Okay, so what happens with those nodes in a crop circle is that they bend, like on the left there, they really bend, just like that, where the node at the bottom is. I don't know why, but they do. Okay, that's really interesting. And sometimes they bend a bit like that, they kind of stretch like there, and you can see more. And then sometimes you get the Holy Grail, which is a blown node. So you get holes where the nodes were. And that's obviously because it's some heat and microwave energy and all sorts of things that we don't even think about. But this does happen because I've seen it. Okay, so this is a true thing. So that's so the other weird things that happen in crop circles is sometimes the corn is burnt, right? Now, I'll tell you, I haven't seen that myself, okay, but I'm told that it does, so I can't verify, but that's what happens. And the other thing that's interesting is that when a crop circle occurs and then the crop gets harvested and then the next year comes, you can still see the outline or the ghost image of a previous crop circle. So that's something that they all say, oh, you know, and sometimes if you have ice and snow, then the snow melts so that the pattern is revealed sort of the next year. So that's quite an interesting thing to see. That happens. And the other thing about a real crop circle or not is sometimes they'll point to the lay, which is amazing and intricate and beautiful and feathery and quite delightful. And they say, oh, you know, there's no way that someone can do that in the dark. So it sometimes looks like that. Sometimes it's a little bit of a basket weave effect, and that's basically how it works. So the way that photographs are actually taken of crop circles used to be with these big poles with a camera on the end, but now they use, I think they're used for fishing, but now they use drones, which are much easier. And in fact, a lot of the people would go in helicopters and everything. And there's a guy called Steve Alexander who has the most amazing archive, and he takes all these pictures from helicopters and things like that. But this is the other interesting that happens when you go to a conference, okay? You've got people with educations and suits and titles like doctor and professor and all this sort of thing who will set up false premises. they will say things that they present as a truth but clearly are not. So they'll say something like, it is impossible to do a crop circle all in one night of this complexity, right? So you can't. It's just not, the nights are quite short in the summer, and it simply can't be done. So we all nod and say, yes, it can't be done. But when you look at it, you will see that this is a crop circle done over 3 nights. Okay, and there it is. That's what it started with, and that's how it ended up. So it's actually just nonsense, you see. And they say things like, oh, it's in the night when it's so dark they can't see their hand in front of their face. How do they do this? The circle makers themselves will tell you that it's actually very, very light with the moon. It's practically daylight, you know. So that's basically how it works. And all sorts of things that they say like that is, you know, things like, well, you know, there's a whole lot of untrampled crop here and there's circle there, and they'll tell you they do things like they take stilts or they go down the tram lines or something like that. So this is what they do, is they'll present facts which are just clearly not true. So that's quite an interesting thing. But now the other little twist is that the circle makers themselves will tell you about some strange things that happen. Okay, so they will tell you that when they're in a circle making it, sometimes they will think there are more people in the field than there should be, that there's 3 of them in the team or 5 in the team, but they get the impression that there are more people. And they say that's really weird, but that does happen. They'll also say that sometimes they know that they've only got a little bit of time left before it becomes daylight, and they've not finished. And then they'll have the feeling that they've had much more time than they should have, like a time thing. So they will report these people who are not believers, who make it themselves, will report all these really strange things. So that's a thing. And the other thing about the Wiltshire landscape is that you do get things like light anomalies. You might take pictures and get a light anomaly in it. I've got pictures like that. But also you can actually see what they call balls of light, and you can see them on YouTube, and people I know have taken, I've seen them but I've never filmed them, but you can. It's like a little dot of light that kind of dances along the landscape, and it goes and goes far, and you can see it and you can photograph it, and you don't even have to take someone's word for it. And that kind of thing does happen, and that's what makes all this just much more mysterious and much more conducive to all this kind of thing. And it is true to say that being in a crop circle is a truly magical experience. It really is a word I use deliberately and intentionally. It's unlike anything I've ever done. And I think it's also probably good that, you know, we probably need to sort of spend a sunny day in a field more often. Maybe that's what it's about. But basically, it really is more than the sum of the parts. It's a really interesting thing. So that's basically how it all works. But what I want to tell you now is basically how it originated. Why do we have all these crop circles which culminated in this heyday sort of 10 years ago? And why don't we see them so much anymore? So the reason that this started with 2 old guys, they're probably not so old there, called Doug and Dave. They were artists who lived in Southampton. This was 1976. And one of them had Australian connections, and he went to Australia, I think it was even in the 70s, and there was this newspaper article in Australia about a farmer who said that a UFO had landed on his farm, and he was photographed next to a flattened circular grass patch, right? So Doug and Dave thought this was hilarious, and they decided that they were going to do some of this stuff in Berkshire. So they did that, took a plank and literally made circles, and, you know, waited for some people to see them, and then people didn't see them. So then they started doing them like in valleys where you could see them from the road, and people did actually notice them. And they started off by doing this is actually upside down, but basically just 3 circles, and people did take notice. People thought, oh, okay. And then it got a little bit more complex, so you've got satellites, you know. I think the original idea was to make it look like a landing gear, and people did take notice, and before you know it, people like researchers like Colin Andrews set up a research station in the field to measure magnetism and heat and all sorts of stuff like that. But again, the interesting thing about crop circles is that sometimes when I've been in a crop circle, I've gone in and all my camera equipment would just die. Nothing battery operated will work. And you go out again and it will work. It doesn't happen every time. It happened once to me, but it did happen. And this was the kind of thing he was looking into. Why does this kind of thing happen? Okay, so that's really quite interesting. Okay, so basically Colin Andrews was one of the main guys. There's another guy called Pat Delgado who was just as into it. A guy called Busty Taylor who had an aeroplane, so he took pictures and he was one of the guys. But there was another guy called Terence Meaden. Now Terence Meaden was smart. He was an Oxford graduate, a doctor, academic doctor, and he was also a meteorologist. And he had this all figured out. He decided and wrote books on it, which I have, that they were caused by weather conditions, and more specifically vortices, which apparently do this, and not just any old vortex, but electrified vortices. And he had pictures and diagrams and currents, and people actually bought into this. Now, allegedly, I've been told or heard somewhere that at that time, in some paper, Stephen Hawking was actually quoted as saying that crop circles are either caused by people with planks or weather effects. So of course this made this guy the hero, because of course he's saying weather effects. So that was all actually quite brilliant. So he's the guy. And then you get straight lines in the crop circle. Suddenly they're not circles anymore, you've got straight lines. So suddenly this vortex thing doesn't work anymore. So he actually amended the theory, and that flew for a little bit. And then you've got these twiddles on the end of it, which kind of messed that up as well, so that didn't go. And then this happened, Led Zeppelin got this album cover, and then suddenly the whole world was interested in what was happening in the fields. So this is Eastfield, which you can see from the road. You don't need a helicopter, you can just see down. So of course Eastfield is very popular for crop circles because anybody could see them. So that's basically what happened. So anyway, so this goes on and on and on, and everyone is like studying it and making their comments and everything like that. And then these guys, Doug and Dave, came out and said, okay guys, you know, we did it. We did all along, and you know, that's how it is. And no one believed them, you see. So basically what they had to do was they had to do demonstrations, okay, so in broad daylight, like and they come with their planks and everything like this, and they do the demonstration, then all these other people come and they look at the notes and they say, oh, you are such liars, what liars are you? This is not a genuine crop circle, it's a fake, you see, because the notes are incorrect. And they eventually said, you know, we're sorry we ever said anything because it was a lot more hassle than it was worth. So poor old Doug and Dave, they know. In fact, I'll tell you that even talking about Doug and Dave is blasphemous. Circle, and you know, this is not something you do lightly, but this is, you know, I wouldn't do it just anywhere. But yeah, this is the story. And anyway, so Doug and Dave, you know, disappeared into the background, and then more groups of people would make crop circles, and they would hone their skills over many years. So basically they started quite basic, and every year they got more complex and more confident and more interesting because the same group had sort of practiced. And eventually it culminated in these brilliant ones that you've seen. And then it continued, and then we had different themes. We had fractals, which were amazing. We had this, which was called the sunflower, which was stunning. And then you get this sort of thing, okay, with messages. Apparently that's actually a full-on message on the sort of some sort of binary or whatever. And entire books have been written about individual crop circles, you know, about messages and all this sort of thing. So that's actually quite interesting. Then you got the jellyfish and things like that. And, you know, sometimes the crop circle conferences sort of resemble almost like a preacher-type church environment. I mean, it's that feverish, and it's almost the same style. And after one of these conferences, we went out into the field, I think, to see that one. And they said, oh, you're going to feel all this, you're going to feel this energy, it's going to be amazing. And we went into the field, I thought, okay. And I was speaking to a woman who was a dairy farmer from New Zealand who was coming on the trip, and I said, I just said to her, I don't feel a lot. And she said, I'm so glad you said that because I don't feel anything at all. And I was too afraid to say. I said, no, actually, no, it's fine. You say to me until then. She says to me, you know, it feels like the church of the crop circle. And I said, you know what, that's exactly what it feels like. And you can almost imagine that myths and tales and even religions could actually stem from something like this. You can actually almost see it happening in front of your eyes. And it's fascinating for that reason. Anyway, so then this all happens, and I'm obviously talking about this a lot with my family. My dad says to me, he sent me this, he says, I know you're into crop circles. This was an article in their newspaper in South Africa, and he thought I might be interested. And I looked at this and I thought, I know, who is that, you know? And then I reckon, is that guy? It was him. And it turns out that he was an airline pilot, and he's a South African guy, and he used to fly over the fields all the time. And he was always fascinated, and of course he came to the conference, and because, you know, to become an expert on something, you just have to know this much more than everyone else. And because this is such a micro niche, he now is writing in the papers because he went to this one visit that I was at, and had his photo and all that sort of thing. So it's really quite amusing. And you do see the same faces coming up time and time again. It's kind of like quite incestuous in some ways. But it's basically how it was. But I have to say it was probably some of the best summers I've ever had. You know, they were just absolutely fantastic and magical. And I will tell you, I did admit this in the last talk, that there was a time, actually, where I don't ever think aliens did anything, but I did think at one point that it couldn't have been guys with planks because they were just so magnificent, so big and all this sort of thing, and I believed all of these things. And I thought maybe it was something to do with the military, which was down the road, and they were doing something remotely or whatever. And like in the 50s when the UFO thing was going on, everyone was quite happy we were talking about Russians and all sorts of things because it meant we weren't, you know, looking at what they were doing. And I did think that. And then actually, you know, when I started finding out who the circle makers were, started finding out what they were saying, then I kind of, you know, realized. And I have to say that it's a bit sad because I'm never going to be able to go back to that magical feeling. But I also you know, feel that, you know, it was like you know, you don't want to be the kid who believes in the tooth fairy sort of when you're 14, you know. So it was rather a bit like that, you know. It was a time for me to kind of to find out what was really going on. But it was absolutely fantastic, multifaceted, most interesting thing I've done probably ever. So that's my story. And if you've got any questions about crop circles, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Kanna.